In order not to be bored at home, the heroine gets a job with a local lawyer. She perfectly copes with her duties but makes a lot of mistakes. The boss helps her learn grammar in a unique way. A special relationship arises between the heroes. One day, the boss learns the secret of his secretary. It's Mr. Narrator and a new retelling. Enjoy the video. The movie starts with Lee finishing her treatment at the clinic. The girl's mother, Joan, came to pick her up. They went to the wedding of the heroine's sister. At the ceremony, Lee met Peter. They had fun on the dance floor. The father, Bert, gave Lee a hug. He was happy to see his daughter back from the clinic. From the excess of emotions, the heroine felt anxious. She retired to her room. Lee found her hiding place. She remembered how she used to bring herself to her senses. After a while, the girl witnessed a quarrel between her parents. To calm down, she put a hot teapot to her leg. In the morning, the heroine went to the secretarial course. Her mother came to pick her up. Joan was pleased that her daughter had found her vocation. Lee remembered how it all began. That day, she slipped and cut herself deeply. After that, her parents hid all sharp objects from her. The girl went to the trash cans to get rid of her makeup bag. In the trash, she found a newspaper. Lee circled a few ads. Then she practiced her speech in front of the mirror. The next day, Lee went to her first job interview. It was raining heavily, but that didn't stop the girl. In the office, she saw a sad woman. She passed by without saying a word to Lee. In the office, she saw a lawyer, Edward Gray. She gave him her crumpled resume. The man blitzed the girl and asked her to make coffee. The lawyer learned that the girl had excellent grades. He thought that Lee would be bored to work as a typist. However, the heroine convinced the boss that she was completely satisfied with the conditions. The mother rejoiced at Lee's success at the interview. At home, the girl lay in the bathtub. She practiced answering the phone. The next morning, Lee started work. Her days became meaningful. One day, she ran into a blonde woman in the restroom. Lee wondered what the paralegal was doing, but the woman only smiled. The blonde forgot her shades. The heroine decided to put on makeup. In the office, Lee noticed her boss feeding the orchids. She brought him lunch. The man lost his notes. He asked Lee to look for them. The girl went to the trash can. From the window, Edward watched the secretary digging through the garbage. The man decided to work out his abs. Suddenly, Lee saw her mother's car in the parking lot. Joan had come to pick up her daughter. It didn't bother her that there were still 5 hours left before the end of the girl's workday. The boss refused the documents Lee had found. He asked the secretary to change the bait in the mousetrap. The man helped the employee hook the bait. As Lee got on all fours to shove the device deeper, Edward watched her feet. The phone rang. Lee dropped the mousetrap and went to answer the call. Tricia O'Connor, the boss's ex-wife, came into the office. She didn't want to wait for the girl to get free. Tricia yelled out the lawyer's name. Lee went to the office to warn of the visitor's arrival. However, Edward hid from Tricia in the closet. He asked the secretary to lie that he was out of the office. Out of frustration, Tricia took her coat off the skid pad and stomped on it. Bert called Lee's work phone from a pay phone on the highway. The connection went dead, however. The heroine was experiencing a lot of nervous tension. She decided to help herself. However, the boss came out of the office. Lee was embarrassed that the man found out her secret. Joan questioned her daughter about work on the way home. She reported that Peter had called. Lee went on a date with him to the laundromat that evening. They found they had a lot in common. Edward walked into the laundry room. Lee and Peter were putting things away. The lawyer saw his secretary smiling at another man. Lee advised her friend to change the laundry. The couple started to get rid of Peter's underwear. Edward watched them from behind the bags of dirty laundry. Peter kissed Lee. Edward got angry and left. At the office, the lawyer made Lee retype letters. When the girl took food from his desk, the man reprimanded her. He didn't like the girl's appearance and her habit of sniffing her nose. In the kitchen, she rehearsed her words of thanks to Gray. However, she did not dare to enter the man's office. In the evening, Lee went to visit Peter's parents. The boyfriend's mother suggested that they have a double wedding with the boyfriend's sister. The next day, Edward called the secretary to his office. Lee used a nasal spray so as not to annoy the boss. The man asked the girl to answer a hypothetical phone call. He wanted her to be more confident answering the phone. The man then asked the heroine to sit down next to him. He asked Lee about her date with Peter. Edward wanted the girl to not be shy to discuss personal things with him. The lawyer revealed Lee's secret. He ordered the heroine to leave everything in the past and walk home. The girl followed the advice of the boss. She enjoyed a walk in the park. Because the lawyer ordered her to walk, Lee felt the invisible presence of Edward nearby. The next day, the girl deliberately made a mistake in a letter. The lawyer reprimanded her for her absent-mindedness. As soon as the man was out the door, the secretary began to sniffle. Edward returned to the reception area. He asked Lee to come into his office with the letter. In the office, he ordered the girl to bend over the desk and read the letter aloud. While Lee read, the supervisor spanked her peach. They did a similar experiment several times. Then Edward asked Lee to retype the letter. In the mirror, the secretary admired the traces of their experiment. With a new version of the letter, Lee went to her supervisor. As she copied the documents, Mr. Gray approved her work. That made the heroine happy. In the evening, Lee informed her mom that she had gotten rid of her addiction. And on her way to work, she threw out a box of sewing supplies. Now the girl was getting everything she needed from her boss. The man punished her for her misdeeds in a funny way. One time, the girl walked around the office with her hands tied to a stick. Another time, she carried a letter to him on all fours. The boss's influence extended to Lee's off hours. The secretary obeyed him in everything. Relatives marveled at how Lee had changed. One day in the office, Edward suggested that the secretary play horse. He strapped a saddle on her back and put a carrot in her mouth. Lee read tips from a magazine on how to get a man to share his feelings. Turning the music up louder, the heroine relaxed. She tried to visualize Peter in her dreams, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Edward. In the next scene, Lee finished typing the letter. The lawyer was on the phone. She wanted to cover the mistake with a proofreader, but she looked at the man and changed her mind. Edward signed the letter without looking at it. Lee was surprised but decided to get his attention in another way. She licked the envelope in which she had put the letter. Gray noticed it. The heroine asked to go home early. She was upset that her boss hadn't told her to stay late. Lee was relaxing by the pool with her mom and her sister's friends. Joan got a call from the hospital. The heroine's father was ill. The women went to visit him. Lee was upset about what had happened to Bert. She went to seek comfort from Edward. Late in the evening, the girl came to his house. The man was working out on the treadmill. Lee couldn't ask openly for what she needed. She told Edward about work and left. After that, their relationship was back on track. The lawyer threw all the red pens out of the office, and no matter how hard she tried to make typos, Mr. Gray didn't respond. The secretary tried to get his attention in other ways, but the man was undeterred. She brought roses and a photograph of herself into the office. Afterwards, Lee punished herself in the bathroom. At work, Edward secretly peeped at the female employee. Lee didn't notice it. She worked hard to get the man's attention. The boss could barely contain himself. He had to wash his face with cold water as Lee taped up the envelopes of letters. After a while, Lee decided to relieve the tension with Peter. She offered to let the boy spank her. Peter was embarrassed. Then the heroine agreed to have fun in clothes without lights. Close acquaintance with a friend disappointed the girl. Early in the morning, she snuck into the office. Lee took out an orchid from the collection of the boss. When Edward was going through the letters, he saw the evidence, the root of the flower. The man decided to get some exercise. The secretary realized that Mr. Gray had discovered the item she needed. Edward circled the root with a red marker. He called Lee into the office. The supervisor asked the girl to lift her skirt. Peter walked into the office lobby. He and Lee agreed to go to lunch together. From the supervisor's office, Lee refused to go with the guy. The girl did what Edward asked her to do. The boss wanted to get to know the heroine better. Having blown off steam, Edward asked the girl to bring him a sandwich. In the restroom, Lee helped herself to relieve the tension. In the next stall sat a paralegal. The woman heard everything that Lee uttered. Having finished, the heroine went to the cafe. At this time, the boss burned everything that reminded him of the girl. He did not understand why he reacted to her in such a way. When Lee returned, the lawyer again arranged an interview with her. He fired her. The girl was angry. Lee slapped him. The man decided to be rude to her. However, it didn't help. Lee wanted to get to know Edward better. Gray gave the girl a letter of recommendation and sent her away. Lee was distressed. She packed her things in a box and went outside. The face of the previous secretary came back to her mind. The woman was leaving the lawyer's office in exactly the same way. At home, the girl took a long swim in the pool. She didn't tell anyone about the fact that her boss had fired her. Lee continued to live her life as if everything was fine. She pretended to go to the office. In reality, the heroine was standing across the street. Lee was watching. Edward had a new secretary. The girl started going on dates. The bald, short guy was too loose in his manners. The guy who invited her to a barbecue thought Lee was not a romantic person. The third candidate had interesting preferences. The man liked to have tomatoes thrown at him. The heroine was tired of looking for the perfect man. She focused on helping her father. After a while, Peter proposed to Lee. The heroine accepted out of boredom. The guy's mother dressed the girl in her wedding dress. Looking at herself in the mirror, Lee realized that it was not what she would have wanted. The girl ran away from the groom's house. She hurried to Edward's office. Gray was rocking his abs. Lee stood before him in her wedding dress. She confessed her feelings to the man. Edward couldn't believe her words. He ordered the girl to sit at his desk, keeping her feet on the floor until he returned. The heroine obeyed. Night fell. Lee didn't move a millimeter. Edward sat in the car in front of the office. He thought the girl would get tired of waiting. He even called Peter to let him know where to find Lee. Edward really liked the heroine too. He tested her by dialing the phone number in the office. The girl tried to pick up the phone with her teeth. As her boss had ordered, she kept her hands on the desk and her feet on the floor. Peter came into the office. He didn't understand why the girl was acting strangely. The groom tried to move her from her seat. However, Lee broke free and sat back down at her desk. She kicked the guy out of the office. Days passed. Lee sat at Edward's desk waiting. She didn't even get up from her seat to go to the bathroom. Relatives and acquaintances came to see the girl. Even Edward's ex-wife came to talk to her. Gray tried to act casual. However, this did not bring the man joy. The girl's relatives stationed themselves in the office lobby to support her. Edward could not sleep on the bed. Taking off his underwear, he slept for several days on the floor. 3 days later, Lee was interviewed. Edward read in the newspaper the girl's confession. He arrived at the office. The man had a glass of coffee in his hands. He found the girl asleep. Edward woke her up, gave her a drink, and carried her out of the office in his arms. The hero brought the girl to his greenhouse. He helped her to undress, bathed her in the bathtub, and learned the history of her scars. The couple grew close. Edward answered all of Lee's questions. They started living together like a normal couple in love. In August, they were married. Their first wedding night was spent in the woods. When Edward went to work, Lee purposely disturbed the perfect order of the man. It was the movie Secretary 2002. Rate this movie in the comments. Would you be willing to repeat the heroine's experience for attention? See you in the next retellings.